So, just as a demonstration, you can see the difference between our two characters. One has an idle animation, and the other, well, is just kind of stuck there. One responds based on where I am in the scene, and the other one continues to freeze. One I can talk to, and the other is completely unresponsive. How do we get a character to animate and respond using different animations under different circumstances? Well, the first thing that they need is an animator controller. So I'm going to go back into my assets. I'm going to go into my characters folder, and then I'm going to go into the folder that I made for NPC2 here, just to help keep this organized and so you can see exactly what I'm doing. First, I'm going to control click and I'm going to hover on create, as we've done many times before. But instead of creating a new folder or C# script, we're going down to animator controller. Clicking there, here's my new animator controller, and it's got a default name. Let's call this NPC2 AC, short for animator controller. Now, if I go and I click on NPC2, you'll see that in her inspector, where it says controller, we have none. There's no controller. So let's take our new animator controller, and let's just drag it and drop it right there. Now we have an animator controller. That seems like a great start, right? But it's not really going to make a difference because there's no animations in this animator controller. You can see what's actually in the controller by double-clicking on it. And then it will open up a new tab called Animator. So in our animator, right now, all that you see on mine is the word exit. But just like working in our scene view, we can drag this scene around to see different things. So if I use two fingers to swipe, I can move around the animator and see everything that's in here. I'll also make my window a little bit bigger so that you can see this a little bit better. So we have these different blocks like entry, any state, and exit. But we don't have any animations. Let's go bring one in. If we go to where our character is here down in our assets and click on this arrow to expand them, you'll see all the different parts of the body and the hair and the clothes. You'll also see something that looks like a little play button. This is an animation. So let's just click and hold and drag and drop this into our scene. You'll notice that automatically this has been connected to entry. So entry just means that when the game starts or when this animator is told to trigger, that the first thing it will do is it will go to this animation right here. Now the animation just has the name of the website that we downloaded it from, which isn't very helpful. But this is the idle animation, so let's rename it in the inspector. Idle. Simple enough. Let's go test it out, because it's already hooked up to the entry position. Alright, if you look closely, it's working. My character is breathing and moving around a little bit. And now suddenly, it seems as though it's not working. Our character is frozen again. So what's going on here? Well, let's jump back to our animator. So in our animator, we have the idle animation, and we have the entry block, which means this is what happens as soon as we start. So as soon as we start, we play the idle animation, and this could be easier if you look at it side by side. So I'm going to break off this window over here, and we're going to simultaneously play the game and look at our idle animation. So as soon as the game starts, the idle animation begins to play. You can see the progress there in the blue line on the right-hand side. Now we're almost at the end of the animation, and when we do reach the end, well, the animation simply stops. There's an easy way to fix this though. All we need to do is double-click on the idle animation in our animator, and then it will open up some options. If we go down our list a little ways, you can ignore most of this stuff up here for right now. If we go down our list a little ways, you'll see loop time. Just like when you want to loop a track so that you hear it over and over again, here we're going to loop this animation so that we see it over and over again, unless we tell it otherwise. So now, when this idle animation finishes, it will repeat. Simple enough. And after you click loop time, make sure that you then click apply. So just testing this out again. You'll see when the idle animation reaches the end, it starts over again. And a good animation will be designed to loop seamlessly so that you can't tell that we're seeing the same animation over and over. Alright, so she's standing there and she's breathing. That's something. Now we want her to be able to wave at the player to get their attention, and then talk to them if they come up and press a key to interact. How would we do things like this? Well, step one is to go get the animations, because right now we only have an idle animation. So let's go back to Mixamo, and first let's just go get a wave animation. Alright, so searching for wave, let's see what we get. The further I scroll, the less relevant these seem to be, so let's go look at the top. Let's pick a wave that's a little bit different than the one that I used for our first character. Let's go with this 2 hands up in the air, waving for attention. Alright, I'm just going to click download. I think that looks alright. I'm only going to change one setting here, because we already have the skin. That's, again, what the character looks like. So we don't need to waste time downloading that information. All we need now is the information that tells the skeleton where to move. So we'll say without skin, click download, and with the asset downloaded, let's just hit show in Finder, and I'm going to drag this in to my characters folder. So here we have waving 1, and when I expand this, we see the actual animation right here. I'll drag this in. Again, I'll rename this so that it's easier to keep track of. So I'll just call this waving. Now you can see that waving is in gray right now, and it's not connected to anything. So the animation is in here, but there's really no way to trigger it, no way to turn it on, no way to make her start waving. So we need to make a transition. I'm going to make this transition from idle to wave, so that she can move out of the idle animation and into the waving animation. To do this, with idle selected, you'll see it glowing blue. Then control click it, and click on Make Transition. You'll get control over this little arrow here, and this line. So you just want to move this until it's snapping to waving, and then click to make it attach. Now that it's attached, it may seem like your work is done. So while we could get them to transition from idle to waving, well, they would just kind of finish their idle animation and then wave, and then stop. Or we could even get this to loop back so that they would idle, then wave, then idle, then wave. But I want this to wave under certain conditions. Specifically, when the character is within a certain area. So I need to set up these parameters, these conditions under which this character can wave. So first I need to create this parameter. In my animator, you can see there's layers and parameters. So make sure that you have the parameter tab selected. And right now this list is empty. So I'm going to click the plus to create a new parameter. This parameter is going to be a bool, which is short for Boolean. So click on bool. Remember, a Boolean is a true-false statement. I'm going to name this Boolean is waving. So in a little bit here, we're going to write some code that is going to tell the animator if is waving is true or if is waving is false. So now I'm going to go down to my arrow here, my transition, and if your list of conditions is empty, just hit a plus to create a new one. So if you've created a parameter, then you should see is waving, and by default it's set to true, which is perfect. So you can just leave this alone after creating this parameter and then adding the condition over here. Now we also want to be able to eventually stop waving. So with waving selected, I'll control click and then select Make Transition and move this back to idle. I want to go back to standing still or idling and stop waving when, so list is empty, I hit the plus. It says is waving is true, but this time I want to say when is waving is false. So when we're not waving, we stop waving, and we make this transition back to idle. So the logic is sound, but there's no code that's actually going to make this happen yet. So let's create a new code that will do just that. I'm going to come down here by my assets, and then I will control click, hover on create, and then select C# script. I'll name this script my wave. Then I'll double click on it to open it up in MonoDevelop. Now I've already written this code for the example that I showed you earlier. So here's the one that's already done. And here's ours. But let's build it together real quick just so you can see how it works. If you want to, you can delete most of this and then replace it. Or, since we do need 2 different voids, you can keep the voids and then just change them as needed. Personally, I'll keep what I have so that I have a little bit less work to do and just edit it to work the way I need it. So I'll get rid of those comments because those aren't going to be very helpful. Now, before I even start creating the functions, I need to create one variable. This is simply going to be getting in touch with my animator controller so that it knows where and how to trigger the animations. First, I need a couple of square brackets, and inside of those, I put serialize field, all one word with a capital S and F. Then outside of those brackets, I write private animator with a capital A, and then we just give a name to our animator controller. So we can just call this my animation controller. So this is where we'll hook up the animator controller that we're using. Don't forget to end this in a semicolon. Now, we have a start function here, but we don't really want a start function. We do want a private void, we just don't want it to be start. So we'll change start to on, trigger enter, and then inside of the brackets that we already have here, we need to add something. In this case, it's collider other. Because what we're going to do is set up an area that has a collider, that if the player walks into this area and collides with this object the code is on, it's going to talk to the animator controller and tell it to do something. So inside of this function, we need a quick if statement. So if, and then all of this is inside of brackets, if other compare tag. And the tag that we are looking for, we need this inside of both brackets and quotations. If that tag is player, then we're going to do something. Keep in mind, my other compare tag here is red because I almost forgot to put the dot in there, other dot compare tag. So this will be checking to see if it's the player that has entered the space. So our character isn't going to wave at like a tree that falls in that space or a ball that bounces through it. Only if it's the player. My if is like its own little function, so I need to create a couple new curly brackets to contain what's going to happen if the player enters this space. And what's going to happen if the player enters this space is my animator controller, or in this case, we called it my animation controller. My animation controller is going to set the Boolean, and now we need to tell it which Boolean. And we need to write this just the way we did in our animator controller. So we need to set the Boolean is waving, and that is inside of quotation marks, comma, true. So we're setting is waving to true if the player walks into a certain collider. And don't forget to end this in a semicolon. So we've turned the waving on. We've set is waving to true. We also need to make sure there's a way to turn it off. So this isn't too tough. In fact, if you want, the easiest way to probably do this is to copy everything in this function, everything from private void down to this curly bracket right here, and I'm going to replace my update function with that. Now, we don't actually want to do the exact same thing, but we're doing something similar, so we don't need to change everything. So when the player leaves this specific area, we're going to set is waving from true, well, there's only one other option, to false. Now it looks like in my copying and pasting, I might have missed a curly bracket, so I need to add one more curly bracket here to make sure that my last curly bracket is attached to the top curly bracket. You can see they highlight each other in orange there. Everything looks good now. I'm going to do a quick file and save, and then let's go test this out in Unity. Okay, so we've got our code, we're back in Unity. What do we actually do with it? It's not going to do anything just sitting down here as an asset. We need to bring it into the world somewhere. And believe it or not, we're not attaching this to the character that it's animating. Let's take a closer look at how I did it with my example. I have two game objects here in my hierarchy that we haven't talked about. I have the wave area, which if you're looking closely is invisible to the player, but here we can see that there's this big sort of green box that designates where the character will wave to us if we enter. And we also have the talk area. If you're standing inside of this box, and press the E key, then you'll interact with this NPC and he'll play his talking animation. I can turn the mesh renderer back on for these boxes so you can see this a little more clearly. If you're standing in the big box, he's going to wave at you. If you stand in the smaller box and press the E key, then he talks to you. And each of these boxes has a script on it. So these boxes are what we attach the script to. Now this looks kind of ugly, so I'm going to turn off these mesh renderers again, because I need these here to designate the area and trigger the code, but I really don't want to see them. So just turning off these mesh renderers is an easy solution. So let's do something for our new friend here. In fact, first I'm just going to take her and turn her so that she's facing this direction. Now, while we're looking somewhere close to her, I want you to go to Game Object, 3D Object, and Cube. So here we have a cube. I want you to take this cube and scale it so that it designates the area where she can see you and will choose to wave at you. So I won't make this too huge, but we'll do something like this. If you're pretty close to her, she's going to wave at you. We'll leave this cube visible just for testing purposes, so we can be sure if we're standing in the area that's supposed to be triggering this animation or not. But right now, if we were to test play something like this, you'll see that we bump into this, and we can jump on it and stand on it like a platform. But we don't want it to work like that. We want it to allow us to pass through it and then trigger a script when we enter its space. This is a simple fix. With this new cube selected, or I might call this NPC2 wave area. In my NPC2 wave area, I want to select this cube, and all I need to do is check the is trigger box. When this is a trigger, it will allow us to pass through it instead of bump into it. It'll also respond to those lines of code that rely on a trigger. Let's go ahead and attach this new My Wave script to the inspector of our wave area. It says Animation Controller None. It needs to know where to find the animator. It needs to know what animation it's going to be triggering and where it is. So we can just take the NPC2 character and drag them over to the My Animation Controller, and that will let it know that it's animating this character instead of this one or anything else in the scene. Another thing you need to check is on your character controller, you need to go to your character controller and check the tag. If the tag is player, great, you're already done. Many of yours will be actually untagged, so just switch it to player, and then you're good to go. Now let's test this out one more time. Alright, so I think we have this all hooked up right. Let's go test it out. Alright, so I'm going in here, but if you notice, is waving is not checked. So this idle animation is going to loop, and it's not going to go on to waving. And honestly, I'm not sure why that is. So I need to go back and check. Yeah, I mean, this is a trigger. Let's go look at the code. So yeah, if we compare this side by side, let's look for something that's a significant difference. If you notice things like here the curly bracket is just to the right of Collider Other, and here the curly bracket is down below, that actually doesn't make a difference. That's not going to change anything. But basic typos like spaces where they're not supposed to be sometimes, or capital or lowercase letters, and actually here's the problem. My working example is on trigger with a capital T. Over here I have on trigger with a lowercase t. I just need to make this a capital T and save it, and hopefully if that's the only mistake that I've made, this will all work. So if you type all the code and you feel like this is perfect, I copied everything exactly as it was, and it doesn't work, don't panic or assume it's a big mistake. Go back and look for the little things. That lowercase t absolutely was at least one thing that was making my code not work. Hopefully it was the only thing. Let's go test it out. Alright, now at first it may feel like this isn't working, and we'll see in a second, but right now it's waiting for the idle animation to finish before starting the waving animation. Sure enough, there's the wave animation. Now you'll notice the wave animation stops and then doesn't loop. And you may also have noticed that waiting for the idle animation to finish may not be exactly what you want. So let's go look at some of these settings. If we want the waving to loop while we're standing in that area, well again, just double click on it, scroll down, and check loop time. Then apply that. Now whether or not you want an animation to finish can be very subjective or dependent on what animation it is and where it's being used and how. But let's say we want the idle animation to stop as soon as we're in the area and she starts waving at us. Well, what we will do is instead of clicking on the idle animation, we're going to click on the transition from idle to waving. And we're going to uncheck Has Exit Time. With Has Exit Time checked, that basically means that it's going to finish the entire animation before moving on to the next one. With it unchecked, that means as soon as another animation is told it needs to be triggered, it's going to happen instantaneously. So with that now unchecked, let's go test this again and see how it looks different. Alright, she's in the middle of her idle animation, and as soon as we step in the box, she starts waving. That probably feels a little bit better. And she'll keep waving until we leave this area. except she's not stopping waving. Let's see if I made the same mistake twice. In fact, I'm almost sure that I did because I copied this code and pasted it down here. So once again, change that lowercase t to a capital, save it, and let's give this one more test. Alright, it's looping and we step out, she finishes that wave animation, and goes back to just being idle. Alright, well guys, this tutorial has already probably gone on long enough, if not maybe a little bit too long for your liking. So I'm not going to worry about showing you how to do the interaction. I will include this code in Schoology, and you can try to hook that up if you want to on your own. And if you're working on it and you want any pointers, just send me a message. Maybe I'll give you a bonus video at some point. But for this week, all you need to do is get one character in here and make sure that that character has an idle animation and a wave animation that turns on when you get within a certain area and turns off when you leave that area. And just one last thing, remember this is very easy. To make the area that you enter invisible, all you need to do is click on the cube that you're using to trigger it, go to the mesh renderer, and turn that off. Now, the collider is still there, and it will still trigger the animation. You just won't have to look at an ugly white cube the whole time. There we go. Alright guys, you know what you need to do and how to do it, so give it your best. When you get it done, be sure to take a screenshot of everything working and share it with me in Schoology. And until next time, good luck and have fun. Aw, look, they're waving goodbye. Later, guys.